thanks for
Good.
joining us for this interview. You're our first interview during this, doing a virtual Zoom meeting. So thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks for asking me.
So we're getting a lot of questions from customers and clients about how to engage their newly remote workforce, because a lot of companies obviously had plenty of remote workers, but this is the first time I think everyone's experiencing all of their staff being virtual. So I wanted to talk with you about that a little bit. But before we dive in, do you mind sharing a little bit about your background and the consulting work and specialties that you have and how you work with us?
Absolutely. So I've been doing internal communications, employee communications for over a decade. And before that, I was a documentary filmmaker. So that's come in quite handy in working on corporate video storytelling and employee storytelling. As a consultant, I primarily work on internal communications, employee communications consulting, as well as a real passion of mine is the diversity, inclusion, and belonging communications. So I've been watching over the last few years a lot of D&I, diversity and inclusion programs, not have the effectiveness as they possibly could. And I had already been innately fusing D&I within my internal communication strategy. So to me, it was all the same. But I was noticing with my peers that they were very separate, or it didn't exist at all. It was just internal communications done from a corporate standpoint rather than a human-centric and more inclusive standpoint. So I've really been spending a lot of time with my peers as communicators and helping them partner with HR, up their game around internal communications as an inclusive and a sense of belonging strategy, and really leveraging communications to create that kind of inclusive and belonging workplace.
So let's dive into some of the questions that we've been getting. The first one is, how much is too much communications from an internal comms perspective? I think people are struggling to figure out, should we be ramping up our communications to employees? Should we be slowing it down a little bit? Are they already getting bombarded with so many other communications around coronavirus from their, different places they belong and things like that? So how do you know the right cadence and frequency for communicating?
Depends on where you're starting from. If you've had no actual communication strategy, then it's going to seem like this influx, but it is an appetite that needs to be nourished and fed. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of decisions that the business needs to make, like that when the business decisions started to shift towards, okay, everyone's out of the office for the next month or the next 3 weeks or whatever it is, even before governmental standards, like in California, which is where I'm based, shelter in place in the Bay Area has been in place for a couple of weeks now, and other places that isn't the case. Right. So there was a lot of tech companies in the Bay Area that had to move very, very quickly. And so it was a daily communication cadence that started to happen in the beginning. But you do need to have a definite central area, like an FAQ, a place on your digital workspace. Definitely, everybody needs to have a central place that people can go to and that it is regularly updated. And if you're a global company, you want to make sure that, like, India is now on lockdown, right? That's 1.3 billion people. So if you have offices in India, how are your colleagues doing in China, Taiwan, Hong Kong, France, Spain? Spain, is really getting a lot of attention right now, Italy. So you want to be having a home base where people can understand, like, what's going on the outside, but how is it impacting your colleagues? But we do need to get to a tipping point now where, through, going along with the change curve, talking about change management, this is all change management, right? Then you need to be infusing that into your rhythm of business and talk about other things. This is a great time for CEOs to step up as visionaries and leaders and saying, definitely, okay, this is where we are, this is who we are, and we're going to get through this together.
And I think that's a great point that you bring up leadership, because I don't know about you, but I have been watching leadership video after leadership video, and the emotion is stripped out. The background doesn't match the message. It's very teleprompter, focused. And since we're talking internal comms, I'm sort of praying that they're shooting other video with the leaders just for employees, but no, they're probably not. Are there tips you'd give because you have such a big video background, you've been, a producer for so long, that could help some of these communicators when they're doing those interviews with leadership prior to the video messages? Any tips there on how to really make sure that the message is heartfelt, transparent, and that employees will feel that because they're going to be watching it at home far away, not in a town hall like before?
Mm-hmm. It's very intimate. So you want to make sure that there's eye contact directly into the camera. And because it feels like the CEO is speaking to you directly. Mm-hmm. I use this when we weren't in crisis, to have that kind of connection and relationship. So that's key. Now, as far as content is concerned, you got to lead with empathy. You can't, this is the best time to convince your leadership to get jargon out of your scripts if you have to script. And so it really has to come from the heart. This is the time to where we get to be more human.
And that's great because I've been getting a lot of feedback that people are nervous to jump on with their managers, executive leadership team, when they know that they don't have a home office set up and the kids will be running around, or somebody might come by in the background, or that they feel pressured to put makeup on and put a nice outfit on for the call. And I've been trying to tell those people when I get those inquiries, I say, you just have to be who you are because everyone is trying to get through this. And I think what you're saying is right. If leaders show that, then the employees know it's okay. It's okay. I don't have to spend an hour trying to prepare for this 30-minute call I'll have with my manager. I can just be who I am in that moment. I mean, of course, that means don't come in pajamas or something. But,
I'm sure that's happened too.
That's okay.
Well, there's a lot of companies that include in their values as well as their culture statements that we want the whole person to come to work. Well, guess what? It's being tested right now. So It takes two things. There's two ingredients to make that work. One is the courage of the individual to show up for who they are. This is when we have that opportunity to really test. Do we really mean that people get to be who they are in order to do the job that they have signed up to do? This is completely changing how we do performance review, how we look at productivity, what meeting etiquette is. It is asking us to completely revisit all of that and what the relationships are based on. If our relationships are based on makeup and ties, then that's not really a great relationship, right? And so this is a time to really allow people to be who they are, to do what they need to do to show up for you, and give them that permission and empathy in order to do it.
And I wonder if that should be formalized during this time, because I know I've been on calls with groups and some choose to use the videos, others don't, they're uncomfortable. And I think that makes it a little hard when everyone isn't sort of on. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if it might be a good idea then for companies to come out with virtual meeting expectations. And it's not the expectation that you have to be on video, but the expectation is that we know there'll be noise in the background, that we know just to lay it out so people have a little less fear about joining virtually with the video turned on.
It's this whole idea of we're all having this equal experience. And so who are we going to be through this experience? This is a character shaper moment, who are we going to be? How are we going to show up? And understand that it really needs to be different from moving forward, and to allow ourselves to be seen however we need to be seen. It takes a lot of courage and it needs permission. And I think it's allowing that vulnerability is going to build much stronger, more authentic relationships at work than if we continue to stay in the conference rooms.
What do you recommend as far as tools or tips for maybe making the content engaging but also tools for getting people involved when they may just be looking at the CEO at the town hall or a couple people on screen, but they want to submit questions, or they may be maybe things they can do ahead of time, like submitting questions through a portal and upvoting, crowdsourcing them, things like that. Any ideas?
Your ideas are spot on. Absolutely. Do what you can ahead of time so you have content that is absolutely relevant to your audience. It's less about what you want to say and more what they need to know. Also, set up your meeting agenda ahead of time. Be more disciplined about that, especially if you have a global team in different time zones. Give them the chance to pre-read and see what the expectations are of them in that meeting. And then give people a few minutes at the beginning of the meeting to just talk about how they're doing. Then when you get into the meeting, especially, let's say it's like an hour long, you want to break up your content every 5, no more than 10 minutes. And that could be through, if you want to show a short video, tell people the kind of questions you want to ask them after they watch the video. This is all ways to keep people engaged, productive, not distracted, even if the cat walks across the lap. They just keep staying with the meeting and pet the cat. It's all good. Permissions are given up front, like we mentioned earlier, or you set that tone.
And you made a good point when you said in the beginning of the meeting, do a little bit of a check on everybody. How's everybody doing? Because I think we have to be as important or as focused on the health safety as well as the mental health, because this is a time where people are going to feel more isolated. We can't begin to imagine how different everybody's home life is. And I know that because of HR policies and things, it's not advised necessarily for a manager to say, are you feeling, suicidal, or, are you feeling down and in the blues, things like that. It just depends on the organization. But I think it's probably a good idea to have some sort of mental resources that you provide your team. Would you agree? Or going at it in a sort of a backdoor way, so not to make anybody uncomfortable based on HR policy. But I think that's really important point, because when you see people, you can also sense their energy levels from day to day, week to week.
Excellent point. I'm glad you brought this up, because this is the time for all HR communicators to have your heyday. This is your time. Yeah. People have been ignoring your emails for decades. Now this is your time. Wow. Right. So you get to show up and really be relevant to what's going on for folks and have engaging contextual communications of all the different health and wellness benefits that the company offers. Now, you don't want to overwhelm people. You might want to break it up. One advantage of this experience, there's many advantages, but one more is that you get to critique the meetings that you're typically in, and you're going to suddenly find that probably up to a third, maybe even a half of them, aren't actually needing to be in meetings. But you can clear your schedule because you need to. Maybe you have someone who is sick in your household that you need to tend to. Maybe it's the kids, whatever it might be. Or because we don't know what people are dealing with.
Correct.
You might have relatives in Wuhan and you're scared to death, and so there's a lot going on under the surface, and people are trying to keep their job. Right. And so how can we support each other and say, we don't need to have this meeting every week. We're going to go to biweekly. How can we just kind of alleviate that stress on our teammates and interject humor where it's appropriate, into our meetings, kind of lighten the mood a little bit. So there's still that connection. There's still that community. Proactively reach out to people and say, hey, let's have a virtual lunch on Thursday. So we really do need to be looking out for each other, because there's a lot more that's going on below the surface and outside of the video frame.
My last question to you is, do you think companies, corporate communication teams should be sending out more frequent pulse surveys? Questions like, do you have what you need to work virtually? Do you feel connected to your manager? Do you feel connected to your team? Do you feel you understand how the organization is adjusting during this coronavirus crisis? Or things of that nature.
I think that's one of your options. You absolutely have to have a feedback loop in place. For those who are having all hands, make sure that you're capturing the questions that are coming up there and getting those questions answered very, very quickly. One thing that came up with India going in lockdown without the broadband infrastructure located in everyone's home, like other parts of the world, one company, learning about this from the employees, quickly instituted a whole new policy around go get a MiFi and expense it.
Yeah.
So that feedback loop has to happen, through, and as corporate communicators, we need to be watching those channels and watching the cadence and paying attention to what frequency employees are getting that opportunity to give feedback, ask questions, and raise their hand and say, I'm having a problem here. So IT communications really has to step up. HR communications really has to step up. So as an internal communicator, I would definitely want to check, like after a month, how you doing? Check sentiment. What else do you need? Well, as someone who has worked from home, quite a lot, it hasn't been a huge change for me. And this is important to remember, is that it's not about ourselves necessarily. It's really looking around, asking the questions, paying attention to our teammates and our colleagues, making sure that they're okay and that they have the opportunity and the psychological safety to give you honest feedback. So if you're a people manager, you need to really make sure that your team really genuinely is okay. You need to focus in on those one-on-ones and make sure that they feel totally safe telling you that everything is working for them. Because if it's not and they're trying to cover, if they go into cover mode, that's going to be a lot harder to disentangle. And we also need to be having larger conversations around what the new normal is going to be once people are allowed to go back into buildings. And so there's a larger cultural conversation that needs to have. So as internal communicators, how are you preparing for that?
That's a great point to leave everyone with. I know that's been on my mind a lot lately is what does this mean for the future? Well, thank you, Kim. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you. Stay healthy.